you've done it again. You're standing directly in front of someone you've met at least 3 or 4 times, and their name is just gone. It isn't even hovering at the tip of your tongue. It is cleanly, surgically absent, as if that specific file was never created in the first place. What follows is 12 seconds of pure, improvised social theater. You're angling your body, nodding intensely, and desperately praying for a fire alarm or a phone call to save you from the void. Society looks at this and sees a person who is careless, rude, or perhaps just not that sharp. But the truth is far more provocative. Your chronic inability to remember names isn't a failure of intelligence. It is a direct consequence of a brain that is too sophisticated to prioritize meaningless data. While the masses are busy memorizing labels, your neural architecture is engaged in a high-level scan of everything that actually matters. If you've spent your life feeling guilty about your bad memory, it's time for a cold dose of reality. Your brain isn't broken. It's just operating on a filter that the average person literally cannot handle. Today, we are dissecting the neurobiological machinery of the name blinder, the individual whose working memory is a battlefield of high-level associations and social survival. We are going to explore why your prefrontal cortex chooses to delete names in real time, the psychological paradox that proves names are semantically empty, and why your social anxiety is actually a hyperactive self-editing software that crashes your memory. To understand why a name disappears, we have to look at the cognitive chaos of the initial meet. When you meet someone new, your brain is simultaneously reading facial microexpressions, registering vocal tone, and calculating your relative social standing. Your working memory, the tiny high-speed storage unit in your prefrontal cortex, is essentially juggling 6 balls at once. You're trying to figure out if this person is a threat or an ally. Into this exact moment of neurobiological pressure, a stranger hands you a single arbitrary sound. "Hi, I'm Kevin." To a high-functioning associative brain, the word Kevin is garbage data. It doesn't trigger an image, a feeling, or a pre-existing concept. It is an isolated island of sound in a sea of intense social processing, and your brain, being an efficient machine, refuses to babysit a rootless syllable while it's trying to navigate a social maze. Psychologists call the proof of this the Baker-Baker paradox, first documented in 1987. Researchers found that if you tell someone a person's profession is a baker, they remember it with ease because it activates a massive neural web. But if you tell them that person's name is Baker, the brain often lets it slide into the abyss because, as a name, the word activates absolutely nothing. Names are semantically empty vessels. They are the order of service at a funeral, while the person's actual essence is the funeral itself. Your brain makes a ruthless executive decision without consulting you. It prioritizes the texture of the person and discards the label. But for many of you, there is an even more personal layer to this called the next-in-line effect. First documented by psychologist Malcolm Brenner in 1973, this phenomenon explains why people in a group often have zero memory of what the person right before them said. Because while that person was talking, your brain was already in output mode, obsessively preparing your own response, editing your posture, and making sure you don't sound like an idiot. If you live with a hyperactive self-awareness or social anxiety, you are effectively stuck in this mode permanently. You aren't forgetting the name. You are simply so busy running your own internal social performance software that the name never even reached your long-term storage. This isn't a memory problem. It is a preoccupation problem, and it usually affects the people who care the most about making a good impression. There is an emotional sting to having your name forgotten. It lands like a silent message that you weren't important enough to stick. But this is where the popular narrative is dead wrong. The person who forgot your name likely remembers the specific way you laughed, the odd take you had on a movie, or the story you told about your family. They remember the real stuff, the biological and emotional fragments that constitute who you actually are. They were fully present for your humanity. They were just absent for the mechanical task of labeling you. Memory is not a digital recording device. It is a biological prioritization system that stores impressions and patterns while ruthlessly deleting the arbitrary. The chronic name forgetter is often a highly associative thinker, someone whose memory is richly contextual and better suited for storytelling than for filing. You can remember what someone was wearing 3 years ago because that has visual and emotional texture. But you can't remember their name today because the label is semantically dead. This isn't a flaw in your mind. It is a particular architecture, one that favors depth over mechanical efficiency. Society rewards the people who can rattle off names because it looks like caring, but often those people are just better at filing labels while ignoring the soul. Your defect is actually a byproduct of a mind that is constantly hunting for meaning and ignoring the fluff. Of course, you can manually bridge this gap by repeating the name or building visual anchors, essentially doing the manual labor that your brain's automatic filter refuses to do. But the shame spiral, the belief that forgetting names makes you a dismissive or uncaring person, needs to end right now. You are not absent, you are simply someone whose internal weather is more intense than the average person's. You are failing at the single least interesting thing about a human being, the arbitrary sound their parents assigned them, and before they had ever done a single thing worth remembering. The name was always the least important part of the equation. What you hold on to, the texture of a person's character, their vibe, their impact, that is what actually makes a human being real. The world is obsessed with the order of service, the labels and the superficial tags we use to navigate social hierarchies. But you are focused on the funeral, the weight, the emotion, and the profound reality of the person standing in front of you. Stop apologizing for a brain that refuses to be a filing cabinet for meaningless data. You aren't a bad friend. You're just an associative thinker in a world that values the sound of a name over the substance of a soul. If this deep dive into the mechanics of your social glitches hit home, it's because you've spent too long looking at the screen and not enough time reading the code of your own mind. You aren't broken. You're just operating on a different, more intense resolution than the crowd. Join us at The Last Realists, where we strip mine the superficial and get down to the neurobiological truth. Subscribe only if you're ready to see the world and yourself for what they actually are. Your name might be forgotten, but your impact is indelible. We'll see you in the next exploration.